Hello, Miss Kate here. Today is the day that Old South Church celebrates one of our former members, Phillis Wheatley. And I wanted to see if we could discover spots around the city of Boston that might help to tell her story. So buckle up, because we have a bunch of places to visit. Our story starts a long way from Boston, in an unknown village or town in Western Africa, probably near the modern-day countries of Senegal or Gambia. A baby girl was born. We don't know what day she was born or what her parents named her. She was maybe 6 or 7 when she was either captured or sold to slavers, who took her to the coast and loaded her onto a large ocean-going ship. Phillis arrived in Boston, perhaps right here on Long Wharf, on a ship called the Phillis. She had survived a brutal trip across the ocean called the Middle Passage, but she was very, very sick. Between 1619 and 1865, millions of Africans were forcibly transported on the Middle Passage to slavery in North America. No one knows how many of these kidnapped people died due to sickness, injury, disease, or rebellion on the ships. Survivors, like Phillis, were sold into slavery. This is a port marker which is located at the end of Long Wharf, and it's a memorial to all the people who died on those cruel journeys, and to all of the people who lived, but who lost everything and everyone. Slavery was a horrible thing. And this port marker reminds us that Boston's history includes parts that we're proud of and parts that are hard to tell. But it's our job to remember and honor all of it. This marker might be just as important as Faneuil Hall or our own meeting house. And it reminds us that there's still work to do around race and equality in Boston and beyond. Phillis was sold to a man named John Wheatley, and she was so sick and so small that they were not certain that she would recover and live. Phillis did recover, mostly, and lived here on this corner of colonial Boston, in the home of John and Susanna Wheatley. So I'm on the corner right now of State Street and Kilby Street. But when Phillis was alive, these streets were named King Street and Mackerel Lane. It was here that her sharp mind and keen intellect were so obvious that the Wheatley family began to educate her as they would one of their own children. She could read and write in English, Greek, Hebrew, Latin. She would have studied ancient history and rhetoric and theology, and she would have devoured all sorts of literature and poetry. Phillis loved words, and as we know, it was right here that she began to write her poetry. Her story was extraordinary, not just because she had opportunities that very few enslaved people had, but she had them as a young woman, and she not only excelled, she was unbelievably good. Here I am at the old State House, the seat of governmental power. The white people of colonial Boston, the people who held all the power, lived within a certain set of pre-made ideas. They said that enslaved people were not capable of refined thinking or intellectual achievements. In order to justify slavery, the white people in power imagined that the Africans and other enslaved people were only capable of simple tasks or manual labor. This is a lie. We know that all humans are capable of being wise, kind, creative, and strong, no matter what body God dressed them in. When Phillis Wheatley's poetry was first published in local papers and shared amongst Bostonians, there were a lot of people who didn't believe Phillis was truly the author. Because the evils of racism and slavery had twisted logic, there were plenty of people who believed that it was impossible that a black enslaved woman could have written such beautiful and moving words. A group of respected men in town, all white, who owned property or had important jobs or were known for their wisdom. These men were asked to stand up for her, for Phillis. We don't know if they gathered together in one place, like maybe at the old State House, or if they each examined Phillis's poetry and the poet herself individually. What we do know is that there is a public declaration of attestation, meaning a statement that says, we believe this to be true, with each of the men signing their name to say that they believed without a doubt that Phillis was the true author of her poetry. The message was, we believe her and we are respected, so you should too. While it's frustrating for us to look back and ask why it was necessary for them to vouch for her, at the time, it would have been a very supportive and also seriously unusual happening. Phillis joined Old South Church on her own after becoming a big fan of Reverend Dr. Joseph Sewell. In fact, one of Phillis's first widely read published poems was in response to Reverend Sewell's death. In 1771, she was baptized here and joined Old South as a member. It was from here, Old South Meeting House, that the men who were angry about England's taxation of the colony gathered before the infamous Boston Tea Party. This is where Griffin's Wharf used to be, where 3 ships were docked in 1773 just after England enacted the tea tax that pushed the colonists over the edge. There was a lot of anger and resentment towards England, and these colonists decided to dump the contents of these 3 ships overboard in protest of England's taxation. One of the ships was named the Dartmouth, and it contained not only tea, but also the first books of Phillis Wheatley's poetry ever to be printed. Thankfully, the books were not dumped into the harbor and destroyed, but their unloading was delayed by the protests for at least a month. Her first publication was very nearly destroyed because of the larger tensions in the colonies. In the next few years, Phillis lost and gained a lot. There were massive shifts in her own life and in the life of the city. Her book of poetry went on sale in 1774. Phillis was released from enslavement, making her a free woman, and Susanna Wheatley died. Phillis still lived at the Wheatley home and continued to write and publish her poetry locally in papers until Mr. Wheatley died in 1778. However, this was also when the city of Boston was occupied and by the British forces, and everyday life was tense and dangerous. Phillis lost both of the Wheatleys, who, while they were her enslavers, they also provided an element of protection and helped to promote her poems to the people in their social circles. She had gained her freedom, but perhaps she also lost some of her opportunities. Phillis met and married John Peters in 1778. They got married at Old North Church by the Wheatley's son-in-law, Reverend Lathrop, and came to live here on what was called Queen Street. It's now called Court Street, just a few blocks away from the Wheatley's home. John Peters had been born a free black man, and he and Phillis both worked several jobs trying to make a life for themselves. Phillis continued to publish letters and poems locally in papers, but she never published another book of poetry. Life was really hard at this time in Boston, and the colonies were at war. There were very few opportunities, even for a renowned poet like Phillis. John got arrested for some old debts and was kept in jail. And Phillis, who had always struggled with chronic illness, lost 2 children shortly after their births. She passed away in December 1783, a few days after giving birth to her 3rd child, who also died and was buried with her. We have no idea where Phillis was buried, but the city of Boston erected a statue of her to honor her contributions to racial and gender equity here on Commonwealth Avenue at the Women's Memorial. We're proud that Phillis was a member of Old South Church in Boston, and her story is a reminder to all of us of the anti-racist work that we still need to do. Will you pray with me? Dear God, thank you for heroes like Phillis Wheatley. May we all be inspired to work for racial justice. And we all say, Amen.